so I'll do this one. Howard, did I get it right? Well, welcome to the Honolulu Hilton. And the concierge wanted everyone to know that the pineapple throwing contest will be at 8 on B, and the boat trip to Kauai will be an hour later after that. But welcome everybody. I'm glad you're here to hear the words from our very special guest. We have a luncheon group that meets sporadically, and it's comprised of reformed sports broadcasters and sports writers. And we have a third member of that group here. I'd like to introduce Dan Lovett. Dan, would you stand? Dan came a long time ago from Idaho to Houston in a covered wagon, KILT, and we were talking at the table. His hair was too great for radio, so he went to Channel 13. And in about 1973, he was recruited by ABC in Washington and then ABC in New York, and now is retired and semi-retired in Houston. And he's found Christ late in his life and is actively involved in a ministry and to African orphans, and they maintain an orphanage. So,
hallelujah.
I want to tell you about this. This is long before any of us had wrinkles. The Houston Chronicle ran a guest column in Monday sports section, and often that responsibility fell to me. And the guest columns came from actually two main formats. Normally, a writer on staff would interview this famous person and then take the interview into written form, column form, and have the subject edit the content. And then occasionally, someone would ask to write the column himself, sometimes herself, usually himself. And it would come back with subject-predicate disagreements, superfluous adjectives, meandering sentences that you needed 2 breaths to read. And those were the good parts. We had to rewrite them. And I asked Larry to do a column years ago. It had to be years ago. And I thought, oh, here we go again. He wants to write his own column. And it came back. It's the only guest column in Houston Chronicle history that received no edit marks. It was this magnificently organized 3-part guest column about Larry's career. The beginning, when he came to pitch for the Houston Colt 45s at age 18, and he was pure talent and no wisdom. And then phase 2, when he was still very talented and had the seasoning of an experienced pitcher. And then phase 3, when the talent had lessened and it was all seasoning and wisdom and knowing where to put the ball and to whom he was pitching. It was just a magnificent article. It really speaks well for the diversity of this man's life and the variety of his accomplishments. He pretends to be a good golfer, but everything else is a whole lot better. He has written a musical. He's working on a novel. He is one of the most intelligent and insightful sports broadcasters as a color analyst of any sport. And wish the Astros would see fit to use him because he brings you into the game. And you know, when you're born intelligent, it's for a long time, and his native intelligence helps, but he can put it into language that anyone can understand. And he never makes, I won't mention the gentleman's name, but Larry never made these goofs like the famous San Diego broadcaster who once told his audience, "There's a deep drive to center field, and the center fielder's going back. Oh no! His head crashes into the wall, and it's rolling towards second base." But I'm looking forward to what Larry Dierker has to say. This 18-year-old phenom of the Colt 45 is the first Astros pitcher or called 45s pitcher, to win 20 games, which for the non-baseball people is the mountaintop for a pitcher. Larry Dierker.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Hal. One of the things you have to learn when you embark on a professional sports career is how to get along with the journalists. And you can make a few mistakes there and learn a few lessons, because what gets in the paper the next day may not be what you thought you said. So you have to be careful. But I would say I see all the Hawaiian shirts. Aloha. Do you know what that really means? Do you know what the definition of aloha is in Hawaiian? Because I think it fits this group very well. Not just because we have some people here that are seniors, because even if we had kids, it would fit very well. It's not only hello in a friendly way and goodbye in a friendly way, but it also means love. And so for me, aloha is the perfect word. And that's not why I ended up wearing a Hawaiian shirt tonight or becoming known as the Hawaiian shirt guy. That goes back a little further. In fact, it goes back to a time when the Astros were struggling. And they weren't struggling not like they are now. They were struggling at a specific moment, which is the worst possible time that you can get into a slump, which is September, when you're in the pennant race. And I was broadcasting at the time. It was 1996, and the Astros were neck and neck with the Cardinals, and we lost a couple of games here and then lost a 4-game series in Denver. We lost 6 straight games. We went into Miami to play the Marlins, had a 4-game set there. We lost the first 2. In the middle of that second game, we'd lost 8 in a row, I think, and we dropped back to 6 or 7 games out, and there were only 2 weeks left. I mean, we literally had just coughed up any chance to get in the playoffs. And so about halfway through that game, the camera panned the dugout, and all the guys in the dugout had their heads looking down at their feet, had their hand in their head. And I was working with Bill Brown, and I said, "Brownie, you know what's wrong with this team?" He said, "We're not hitting." I said, "Yeah, but it's more than that." "Well, what is it then?" I said, "Not enough Hawaiian shirts." And he said, "What?" I don't know how that came into my head. I literally do not know how that sentence came into my head, but it changed my life. He said, "Well, where's your Hawaiian shirt then?" And I said, "Oh, I'll wear it tomorrow." I didn't have a Hawaiian shirt at that time. So I went to a mall in September of 1996 in Miami, Florida. I went through all the department stores and all the specialty clothing stores, and I couldn't find one single Hawaiian shirt. That's how unpopular and out of style they were in 1996, even in Miami. I did find a shirt with a couple of flowers on it, and so I wore that. And so the next night, we lost again, and during the game, we talked a little bit about the Hawaiian shirts. At this time, as a broadcaster, you just want the season to end. You know you've tried so hard so long to get in the playoffs, and you can just see that it's slipped away, and it's already slipped away, but you still got 10 or 12 more games that you have to play, and if it's your job, you have to try to make the games entertaining. And so we kidded around about Hawaiian shirts quite a bit, you know, trying to defer the attention away from the team and what was happening, just the same way that these guys are trying to do now. I mean, you really have to earn your money when the team is unpopular. And so we went to Atlanta, and I think the streak reached 12 straight games, which is a team record. I think we might have broken that last year. In fact, I think we lost more than that many games at the end of last year. It might be a streak still in progress. But anyway, when we got home, a couple of fans came up and brought me Hawaiian shirts. And I had called my brother from Atlanta, and I had a couple of Hawaiian shirts that he overnighted to me. And so I went out to the ballpark one day, and it was at a time when I was doing the road games on TV with Bill Brown and the home games on radio with Milo Hamilton. And so I had this Hawaiian shirt on that my brother gave me, and it had a lot of these Woody station wagons on it with the surfboards coming out the back window and everything like that. And so I was sitting there preparing my scorebook an hour before the game, and I got this devilish thought: I'm going to get Milo tonight. So I told the interns and the radio engineer, said, wait till about the third inning, you know, once he's finished setting the stage and everything. I said, okay. So I said, Milo, you know what this is? I pointed to the Woody station wagon on my shirt. And he said, oh, station wagon? I said, yeah, it's a station wagon, but it's also a Woody. You know, this was when I was growing up in Southern California in the 50s and 60s, it was a surfer car. It was so popular. You know, it was more than just a station wagon. It was a Woody. He said, well, I grew up in Iowa. I didn't know they called them that. I said, well, yeah, they do. And so now you have to put yourself in the right place. You're not watching the game. You're in your garage refinishing some furniture with the radio on, or maybe you're driving across Houston from one place to another. You're listening to the radio, but you're not watching anything. And you're just hearing people talk. And so it gets to about the third inning. And I say, I think somebody went out to visit the pitcher, and I knew I had a little time. And I said, Milo, how do you like my new Hawaiian shirt? Well, I've messed this up. I didn't set it up properly because I have to consider my audience. There probably are, you know, maybe 2 or 3 people in this audience that didn't know that the word Woody had another slang interpretation which was much more popular at that point in time than the station wagon. And that was that a Woody was a slang term for an erection. So I say, Milo, how do you like my new Hawaiian shirt? You mean the one with all the Woodies on it? I said, yeah, when you were a young man, did you ever have a Woody? He said, no, we were much too poor. So I said, boy, that's really poor. And he never had a clue. The people in the back of the radio booth were running out into the hall because they were afraid they'd laugh so hard it would come out over the air. The radio engineer was like this. And we got through that inning and we went on. Of course, everybody in the Astrodome that worked for the Astros heard about it the next day. Everybody was laughing, and Milo still doesn't. It was a year later before he realized what had happened. So that was part of the Hawaiian shirt story, but then after that, people would ask me about it and say, what is it that you like about Hawaiian shirts? And I'd say, well, have you ever seen anybody wearing a Hawaiian shirt that wasn't having a good time? I said, well, that's a good point. I think that that's part of how I became the manager of the Astros. After the season was over, about a week later, I got a call from Tal Smith. Could I come and talk to him in his office? Well, he had done this before, both at the Astrodome and in his office. Just try to pick my brain. What do you see in the team? What could we do this winter to get better? You know, our pitching, have you seen anything about our pitching? That's been our biggest problem. And we talked about the team for about 45 minutes. And I looked out the suite. He was in the gallery. He had some offices up there. And I looked through the glass door, and Jerry Hunsicker, the general manager, was walking around out there. And he said, I've asked, oh, you see Jerry, come on. So Jerry came in. He said, Tal said, I've taken the liberty to order some sandwiches up. We're going to have some lunch here. Jerry would like to participate in this discussion too. So we talked about the team some more. And then I looked through those doors, and Drayton McLean was walking around out there. And I said, something is going on here because this is not what I thought it was going to be. And when I saw Drayton, I realized it could be that they're going to let Terry Collins go and that they're going to ask me who they should hire or if I wanted to do it. So at that point, I had a clue. And Drayton came in, and from the tone of his questions and tenor of the direction he was taking, I knew they were going to ask me. And at that moment, I felt like if I decline, I'll really be chickening out. It'll really be go against everything that I've ever believed in, which is one of the reasons I was able to pitch when I was 18, and that is that you should accept challenges and go forth prepared and with confidence. And so I thought if they asked me, even though I hadn't managed in the minor leagues, coached in the major leagues, I hadn't even coached any of my kids' teams because I was always busy with the playing and the announcing. I had never coached at all. And I thought if they asked me, I'm going to say yes unless she says no. Could you stand up, Judy? It's my wife, Judy. So I got home and she said, well, I guess they finally realized how much you're worth and what you can do, which was the perfect answer because it gave me a little more confidence. And so we went out to watch our son play that night. They told me the press conference was going to be the next day. We watched with all the parents, and the next morning and they had a press conference and they announced that I was going to be the next manager. And the next night we went back to the same fields, and I started signing autographs before the game, and people came from 5 fields away, and I signed autographs for an hour. And I went, wait a minute, I was just here last night. Things really changed. In fact, it reminded me of something that a kid said to me in Philadelphia. We got off the team bus, and my career was over relatively early. I was 31, and I was an announcer right away, so I was younger than some of our players. And when I got off the team bus, the kids standing for autographs, one of the kids said, didn't you used to be somebody? So I said, yeah, I signed a couple autographs, went on into the stadium. I told that story to our broadcast director at the time, and he got a big laugh out of it. So I went back the next day after I was going to be a manager, after I went out to the field and signed autographs again, and I told him that story, and I said, Jamie, you know what? I used to be somebody, and now I'm somebody again. No, then I was nobody. I was somebody for a while, then I was nobody, and now I'm somebody again. So it's interesting, in the public spotlight, how your image changes and what that means to your life. I've been trying not to talk too much about the Astros, and I have endeavored to be able to recite Casey at the bat because I think that this particular audience could appreciate it. And also because I've always got, and I just always have a way of wanting to do something a little bit different, or twist something, or play a mind game, or do something that will make you think. And the thing that I want you to think about as I'm talking about what happened to the Casey and the Mudville team is that what happened on that day could never happen today. It would be impossible for what happened in that game to happen today. Now, I've got a book here. It's got some of the stories I wrote for the baseball library when I was doing radio. It's a very nice little thing. It's illustrated by a friend of mine, and it's got a lot of fun stories. And after I finish, whoever can tell me why it couldn't happen today, what happened back then in 1888 when Ernest Thayer wrote the poem, well, then you will go home with this. The outlook wasn't brilliant for the Mudville Nine that day. The score was 4-2 with but an inning left to play. Edwin Cooney died at first, and Barrows did the same. A sickly silence fell upon the patrons of the game. A straggling few got up to go in deep despair. The rest clung to that hope that springs eternal in the human breast. They thought, if only Casey could get a whack at that, we'd put up even money now with Casey at the bat. But Flynn preceded Casey, as did also Jimmy Blake. And the former was a Lulu, and the latter was a cake. So upon that stricken multitude, grim melancholy sat, for there seemed but little chance of Casey's getting to the bat. But Flynn let drive a single, to the wonderment of all, and Blake, the much despised, tore the cover off the ball. And when the dust had lifted and the men saw what had occurred, there was Jimmy safe at second and Flynn a hugging third. Then from 5,000 throats and more, there rose a lusty yell. It rumbled through the valley and rattled in the dell. It knocked upon the mountain and recoiled upon the flat, for Casey, mighty Casey, was advancing to the bat. There was ease in Casey's manner as he stepped into his place. There was pride in Casey's bearing and a smile on Casey's face. And when responding to the cheers, he lightly doffed his hat, no stranger in the crowd could doubt 'twas Casey at the bat. 10,000 eyes were on him when he rubbed his hands in dirt. 5,000 tongues applauded when he wiped them on his shirt. And while the writhing pitcher ground the ball into his hip, defiance gleamed in Casey's eye, a sneer curled Casey's lip. And now the leather-covered sphere came hurtling through the air, and Casey stood a-watching it, in haughty grandeur there. Close by the sturdy batsman, the ball unheeded sped. "That ain't my style," said Casey. "Strike one," the umpire said. From the benches black with people there arose a muffled roar, like the beating of the storm waves on a stern and distant shore. "Kill him! Kill the umpire!" shouted someone on the stand. And it's likely they'd have killed him had not Casey raised his hand. With a smile of Christian charity did Casey's visage shone. He stilled the mighty tumult and bade the game go on. He signaled to the pitcher, and once more the spheroid flew. But Casey just ignored it, and the umpire said, "Strike two." "Fraud," cried the maddened thousands, and the echo answered, "Fraud." But one scornful look from Casey, and the audience was awed. They saw his face go stern and cold. They saw his muscles strain, and they knew that Casey wouldn't let that ball go by again. The sneer is gone from Casey's lip. His teeth are clenched in hate. He pounds with cruel violence his bat upon the plate. And now the pitcher holds the ball, and now he lets it go. And now the air is shattered by the force of Casey's blow. Oh, somewhere in this favored land, the sun is shining bright. A band is playing somewhere, and somewhere hearts are light, and somewhere men are laughing, and somewhere children shout. But there is no joy in Mudville. Mighty Casey has struck out. Why couldn't that happen today?
I would intentionally walk him, to be honest.
You got it.
What was it? First, second, and third, first base.
You got a man on second and third. Casey was built up to be 10 times Babe Ruth. If the manager didn't walk him, he'd be fired today. There you go, Lance. Come on, I'm going to answer some questions. Here, hand it to him. How much time have we got? Robert, I meant to thank you for inviting me. So do we have any more time at all? 5 minutes or something like that?
15.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions? Sure.
When you came out of high school and were drafted in 1964 and came and pitched in September on your birthday, how much were you signed for in 1964?
In 1964, at the age of 17, I conducted the most successful negotiation that I have ever done in my life. And all I had to do to win that deal was to promise the scout from the Cubs that I wouldn't sign until I talked to him tomorrow, because he offered me $30,000 and he said, I think the Colt 45s are going to offer you more. And I'm going to call Chicago and try to get them to let me offer you a little bit more too, because we really need you, and I think you should play for us. We're going to be a great team. We're coming up and you could be there pretty quick. And so I said, okay, Mr. Henley, I won't sign with the Colt 45s. I won't do anything until I talk to you tomorrow. So the Colt 45s called and they offered me 35, and I went, oh, that's good. But I told him I can't really sign until tomorrow, because I promised Mr. Hanley that I wouldn't sign, until he called Chicago to see if they could offer me more money. So Colt 45s called a half an hour later and offered me 40. By 11 o'clock that night, it was up to $55,000. But it finally ended up $55,000, and they would give you they were going to give me a brand new Mustang, which was in '64. That was the first year of the Mustang. And had I been a mature young man who would take good care of that car, and it would have been worth a lot more than what I took, which was the alternative, which was a scholarship where you could go to school during the off season and they would pay $1,000 a semester for your schooling. And so because my dad had insisted that I go to school during the off season anyway, he was practical and he was a businessman, and he said, the odds of you making the major leagues aren't that good. If you do, you're probably not going to make enough to retire. You're going to need an education anyway, and you're 17, you can't sign unless I sign too, and I'm not going to sign unless you promise me you'll go to college. And so I ended up with $55,000 and a scholarship for 8 years of college at $1,000 a semester. And that's where I started. Oh, it was a great place to start, and to get up into the major leagues and pitch on my 18th birthday and strike out Willie Mays. It's a Cinderella story. I wish it would have gone on longer and I hadn't had arm trouble and I could have pitched more and more and won more games, but I can't look back and have one single regret. It's been great, and there were a lot of other moments like that that I was able to enjoy that a lot of people could only dream about. And, a lot of things that I did too that probably I wouldn't have done if I'd have been a good boy and gone to college and not gone into the major leagues and hung around with a bunch of dirty old men. So, yeah, Lance?
Do you have any stories or a story involving Mickey Herskowitz?
Mickey Herskowitz? Yeah, I do. That first year, I pitched 3 innings against the Giants, and then we went on the road, and I got into a game in relief against the Giants again at Candlestick Park, and then I got into another game in the last series of the year, which they were playing in Los Angeles, which was my hometown. So I had a lot of my friends out there and my family and everything, and I got into the game again, and I pitched 5 innings in that game and didn't give up any runs. So at the end of it, I'd pitched 9 innings and given up 2 runs. But in that game, I struck out Frank Howard twice. I don't know how many of you remember Frank Howard, but he was 3 inches taller than me and 50 pounds heavier, and it was all muscle. And I'd never seen anybody like that in the batter's box before. So I struck him out a couple of times, and Mickey Herskowitz came up after the game, and he said, "Well, Larry, you pitched against Frank Howard. What was that like?" And I said, "It was scary." I said, "He was so big, I didn't know." He said, "Well, how did you strike him out?" And I said, "Well, you know, I had been talking to my brother, and he was saying, you know, that Howard, if you have to face Howard, throw him a lot of breaking balls in the dirt, because he'll swing at any kind of breaking ball down in the dirt." So I threw him sliders down and away, down in the dirt, and he swung at him, and that's how I struck him out. And Mickey said, "You struck out Frank Howard on a scouting report from your brother?" He said, "How old is your brother?" And I said, 14. Mickey was such a great guy. I don't know, a lot of you probably followed his columns over the years, but there was a time when Hal was covering, and Mickey and John Wilson and a lot of the other writers, where they had a certain respect and admiration for the players, and they didn't really try to dig up any dirt, and if they happened to see some, they ignored it. And so they were allowed to present sports and the sports page as if it were more innocent than it really was. And now with the unseemly things, with the steroids and a lot of the things that the current players get involved in, they're all fighting for that story. They're not going to ignore it. They're looking for it. And Mickey was the master of them all in terms of having the respect of a player. You knew you could tell him anything and everything and tell him the truth, and whatever he wrote, you would be happy to read it. And that's not always the case with the guys that cover these days.
Larry, are you free to comment on the current Astros?
Well, yeah, I can comment on the current Astros. I can't comment very with a whole lot of specifics, because I'm really not in the in crowd out there anymore. But I can say that they've surprised me by losing so many games these last 3 years. We never lost 100 games, even when we were the Colt 45s and we were an expansion team. Even the first year, we finished ahead of the Cubs, and it was the first year of the expansion team, and the Cubs had been around for 100 years. Well, not 100, but at that time they've been around for about 70 years. So yeah, I was surprised when we lost 100. I would have been willing to bet anybody the second year that we wouldn't lose 100, not because I thought we were going to be good. I just didn't think it was really, I thought it was almost impossible to lose 100 games, no matter how bad you were. And after 2 years, I would have bet again last year that we wouldn't lose 100 games. And this year, I would bet again that we won't lose 100 games. But the difference this year is that in the beginning, the owner said, our farm system is in a shambles. We're going to have to trade any players that have value and get young players in return. We're going to have to do as well as we can in the draft, and we're going to have to rebuild through the farm system, and it may take a while. And I hope that you will be patient with us because we think that in the end it will pay off, which was exactly the right thing to say and do. And that's exactly what we've said and done up to this day. But what I've read in the paper from the owner leads me to believe that he's beginning to get impatient. And I think with the problems they've run into with the Comcast TV deal have been a big factor in that, because I think they thought they were going to make a lot of money off of that, and I think they're not making anywhere near as much, if not losing money in any way. It's just what he bought wasn't what he thought he was getting, and so now I think he's getting a little impatient. Well, the general manager, who has been building through the farm system, his history is in the farm system and in the amateur draft, and I think his marching orders in the beginning was to let's build a team for the future. Well, this offseason, he started signing some guys that are 29 or 30 that have 3 or 4 years in the major leagues, that have had a big season or two, that may be coming off an injury, but he started to spend some money on guys that have had significant success in the major leagues. That's not going to get us over the hump. I doubt if it's going to get us to even where we could play 500 ball, but I'd be willing to bet it'll get us to the point where we won't lose 100 games. We're going to have more veteran players that have physical talent. The last couple of years, we've just had a bunch of young guys that have some talent, a whole bunch of AAA guys that with any other team, they'd be in AAA. With us, they're in the major leagues. And the nice thing about that is that there are a handful of them that I think have proven that they could be maybe a platoon partner at a certain position or a good bench player for a specific purpose, but not a guy to tie down a position and maybe make an all-star team. If you're going to get back in a position where you are contending for the playoffs in September, you have to be able to match up with most of the teams you play at least 6 positions and be better in a few of them. And you have to have a good bench, and you have to have a good starting rotation, at least 3 deep, maybe 4, and a good bullpen. It's not like the Rockets, where you have 3 or 4 good players. If you can add 4 more, you're there. In baseball or football, I think it's going to be a long haul for the Texans too. They got a 40-man roster. We got 25. When there's that many things that you need to fix, it takes a long time. But I don't think what they've done so far this winter is going to sabotage their ultimate goal, which is to build through the farm system and come up with a good young team, because the most recent TV deal is giving each team an extra $25 million to spend, and I think they've pretty much spent it on the acquisitions they've made this offseason. So I think they'll be better. I don't think they'll be in contention in September, but it'll probably be easier to watch. It's just hard. I know how you feel, because believe me, you can feel it 10 times over when you're in the broadcast booth. You can almost hear the people switching to a different station. You get behind 3 or 4 runs and you've lost 5 in a row, and you're thinking, what can I say to keep these people watching this game or listening to this game? And yet there are still people out there that are diehard fans, and they won't give up. And if they're not going to give up and they're going to sit there and listen to every game while you lose 100 games or more, if you're in the booth, you got to do your best to make the game as good as it can be for them. And so, yeah, I think they'll be a little better, but they're still not going to be what you want them to be.
And the American League is tougher than the National League.
Well, the comment was that the American League is tougher than the National League, and that may be true overall. I think that the American League East is probably the toughest division in baseball. But last year, the National League Central was a tougher division than the American League West. The Astros actually got into a division that everyone thought would be a lot tougher. And as it turned out, the Cardinals were good, the Reds were good, and the Pirates came together in the kind of way that I hope we're going to come together 2 or 3 years from now, with a lot of great young players. And so you had 3 teams in the National League Central that won more than 90 games, and that was better than the American League West, where the Astros were. So, you know, you can't, when I was playing, our best years, talent-wise, were the late 60s, early 70s, and it was always the Big Red Machine and the Dodgers. And we were in the same division, and there were several years when I thought we were good enough to win the East. A couple of years, the Mets won it, I think in 72 or 3 with an 81 in 77 years, 78, 1 and 1. Anyway, the 81, 79, they were just 2 games over 500 and they won the East. We could have won that division that year, but we weren't in that division. And so there's some luck to it, whatever sport you're in. As we come through these football playoffs, people are talking about, you know, some team had an easier way to get there than another team did because the NFL or the AFL is better than the other one. And as a player or a broadcaster or whatever your position is with the team, you can't do very much about what division you're in. You just have to try to make the best of what's in front of you. And the one thing you certainly don't want to do is make excuses. I don't think anybody likes that.
Do you think it's possible that technology has taken over has gone too far in sports in this country? I'm talking not only about baseball and football. I mean, there was a time when we always relied on the human element to decide, and now have we gone too far?
Well,
is it good or bad? I don't know.
technology, you know, I mean, we can't even figure out how to take a picture over here with our new iPhone. You know, this is it's the technology advances are certainly more accessible to younger people with pliable brains and more, you know, a whole network of friends that are also using the same things that can help them out and everything. And technology in baseball analytics has grown a lot. You know, Moneyball was quite popular, talking about the things that you could do by understanding statistics beyond the statistics we were used to. And most teams were doing that at that time. And most teams are doing it even more now. The question was, could you go too far? And can you get to the point where you're relying only on quantifying a human being rather than judging him not only in terms of how you quantify his performance, but by what does he add as a human being to your team? What is he, or does he detract from your team? Is he the kind of guy that's going to rally around and be positive and guys will do better? Is he the kind of guy that is always complaining and demanding favors and everything, making a lot of money and showing up late? You know, there's a lot to being on the field and in the locker room that I think has value. And so I say, yes, I think you can go too far. I think you could put together a team full of whiners and complainers that had numbers that were unassailable and that team couldn't win. So I think you could also put together a team full of guys that were great ball players that had good numbers and were great guys that worked together well, and they could beat a team that had better numbers if you wanted to just run the analytics. One more.
What about instant replay in baseball, particularly some of the calls are so bad?
Okay, I'm going to be quick on instant replay because we don't have much time. But instant replay for me, there's one thing they could do that I would support, and I don't think it'll happen because the umpires just wouldn't accept it. I think they should use the little box they put on TV for the strike zone. If I were a pitcher, I would want that box there because I know that box would be in the same place every time. And that umpire is going to call this pitch right low and away at the knees a strike one time and a ball the next time. And I don't want that. As a pitcher, I want to know what the strike zone is. And if I hit it, I hit it. If I don't, I don't. And if I'm a hitter, I want to know the same thing. I don't want to take this pitch on 2-2 and have it be 3-2 and then take the same pitch on the next pitch and have them call it a strike. And so for me, yeah, instant replay, that wouldn't make the game any longer. It wouldn't take any, you wouldn't be studying a play to see if a guy missed the base or missed the tag or something. You just put a little buzzer in the home plate umpire's back pockets and zip, it's a ball, it's a strike. Well, you know, like I said, the umpires wouldn't like it, and that's why it won't happen. But the hitters and the pitchers would like it.
And I think the viewers would like it too. I would.
Yeah, well, I think so. You know, really, if that were happening, they wouldn't even need the box. But for now, I think it's nice to look at it because you can see the human element of how they miss pitches and how, you know, just how it is. And was that way when I pitched. I knew there were pitches that were strikes that they called balls. There were some that I went, thank you very much. I knew it was a ball, but he called it a strike. It would be a better game if the strike zone was the same all the time. Thank you all for your attendance and everything. Enjoy talking with you.
Thank you so much.
You weren't supposed to get that on the first try.
Took a guess. A wild guess.
A short business meeting right now, but I'm sure that people will have questions. So if you need to go, you are free to go, but we would love to have you stick around if there are other questions that you might find interesting. And I know some of the people would like to visit with you as well. So thank you again for your talk. It was great having you here. And Judy, thank you for coming.
Oh,
Also,
thank you for
it was a pleasure
inviting
to
me.
meet you and have you here too as well. As you know,
For a little while.
may not know,